years, rumors had circulated about the old swimming pool at St. Agnes High School. The pool was shut down after a tragic accident involving a student named Emily. The story went that during a swim meet, Emily had drowned, though no one could explain how or why it happened. The official cause was an accident, but there were whispers that said she had been pushed. As the years passed, the pool was abandoned, its tiles cracked, the water gone stagnant. But the legends persisted, and students who passed by late at night swore they heard faint splashing sounds or even the soft sound of someone crying. One fall evening, a group of seniors, led by Luke, decided to explore the pool. It was an old school tradition, finding the most haunted places in town and daring each other to spend the night. The group had already explored the abandoned gym, the boiler room, and the old science wing, but none of those places compared to the infamous pool. It was around midnight when they made their way to the pool area. The door to the pool was rusted and locked, but Luke, always the daring one, had brought a crowbar. He wrenched open the door with ease, and the group stepped inside. The smell of mold and dampness hit them immediately, but it was the stillness that made them uneasy. The pool was dark and empty, the water long gone, leaving only a dry, cracked basin. The walls were covered in old graffiti, the remnants of students who had dared to come before them. But what caught their attention was the deep end of the pool. The tiles were discolored, a strange, almost unnatural shade of blue. "All right, enough standing around," Luke said, trying to mask his unease. "Let's get a good look." But as he stepped closer to the edge, something strange happened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the faintest sound of water rippling echoed through the air. Everyone froze, looking around. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. Before anyone could respond, the sound grew louder, the unmistakable sound of water splashing, followed by soft, guttural sobbing. The group stared at the pool, their eyes wide with fear. Then from the depths of the pool, a figure began to emerge, a girl. Her skin was pale, her hair dark and wet, clinging to her face like seaweed. She looked up at them with hollow, glassy eyes, her lips forming a word they couldn't hear. "Run!" Luke screamed, but it was too late. The girl lunged forward, her cold, wet hands grabbing Luke's legs and pulling him into the pool. He screamed, but the others couldn't move. They were frozen, watching in horror as Luke was dragged beneath the surface, his screams gurgling into the depths. The splashing stopped. Silence. When the police arrived the next morning, they found the pool empty, just as it had been for years. Luke's body was never recovered. The pool was sealed once again, but the legend of Emily and the drowned girl lived on. And sometimes, late at night, when the air's still, you can hear faint, splashing noises coming from the pool and a soft, distant cry for help. The beginning of the semester was always a time of excitement, a fresh start, and new faces. But for Emily, her final year at Briarwood High wasn't starting off the way she had hoped. Her favorite teacher, Mrs. Green, had retired over the summer, and in her place, the school had hired a new teacher for English, Mr. Wren. At first, Mr. Wren seemed like a dream come true. He was young, charismatic, and had an air of mystery about him that drew the students in. His classes were lively, engaging, and unlike any other teacher Emily had encountered. But there was something off about him, a certain coldness that lingered just beneath his charming exterior. It started small. At first, Emily noticed how Mr. Wren always seemed to know exactly what each student was thinking, how he would look at you with a knowing gaze that made your skin crawl. Then, he began to show up around the school at odd hours. It wasn't unusual for teachers to stay late to prepare lessons, but Emily had started to see Mr. Wren in places where he had no business being, by the lockers, in the hallways, or even lurking around the old unused parts of the school. One evening, after school had let out, Emily and her best friend Sarah were walking home when they saw him again. He was standing by the old gymnasium, staring at the school building as if waiting for something or someone. "Isn't it creepy how often he's around?" Sarah remarked, noticing Emily's unease. Emily nodded, but she didn't say anything. The truth was, she was growing more and more uncomfortable with the teacher's behavior. The next week, Emily stayed late at school to work on a project. As she passed the hallway leading to Mr. Wren's classroom, she saw something unusual. His door was cracked open. Curiosity got the better of her, and she peeked inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Mr. Wren was standing at the front of the classroom, speaking to an empty room. His voice was low, almost a chant, as he scribbled something furiously on the board. "They always come back," he muttered. "They never truly leave." Suddenly, his eyes shot to the door, meeting Emily's gaze. His smile was too wide, his teeth unnaturally sharp. "Emily," he said, his voice sending a chill down her spine. "I didn't expect you tonight." Terrified, Emily stumbled back, but he was already at the door, blocking her escape. He reached out and placed a cold hand on her arm. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "But now that you're part of it." Before she could react, he released her, and Emily bolted down the hall, her heart pounding. She never spoke of what she had seen, but after that night, she couldn't escape the feeling that Mr. Wren wasn't who or what he appeared to be. Something dark lingered behind his eyes, and Emily was sure he knew more about the school's history than he let on. It wasn't until later that year, when Emily's class went on a field trip to an old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, that she learned the truth. Mr. Wren had been there before, many years ago, teaching at a different school. And the mansion, well, it had a history of its own. The students from that old school had all mysteriously vanished, one by one. Emily realized then that Mr. Wren wasn't just a teacher. He was something far older, far darker, and the students he taught were never truly safe. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when Sophie and her friends dared each other to explore the old, forgotten wing of the school, the kind of place where no one ever ventured unless they had to. The building was ancient, originally constructed in the early 1900s, and over time, several sections had been abandoned, the doors sealed off, and the halls left to rot. One part of the school, in particular, had always been whispered about, the old science wing, the one that was supposed to have been closed off after a strange fire decades ago. Sophie had heard stories about the room before. Some students claimed they saw strange shadows moving in the windows, while others said that sometimes, late at night, you could hear soft whispers coming from within the crumbling walls. Of course, most students dismissed it as rumors. After all, what else could explain the eerie silence that surrounded that part of the school? But Sophie wasn't so sure. She had always been drawn to the unknown, and the more she heard, the more curious she became. One afternoon, when the school was emptying out and most of the students had gone home, she and her friends, Lily, Ben, and Jordan, decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights and a sense of bravado, they snuck past the janitor's closet and found the rusty door that led to the wing. The hinges creaked as the door reluctantly opened, revealing a long, dark hallway. Dust motes floated in the faint light from their flashlights. The air felt stale and cold, and the walls, once bright with the school's old colors, had started to peel and decay. The faint smell of mildew mixed with something else, a scent Sophie couldn't quite place. "We shouldn't be here," Ben muttered, his voice uneasy. "This place feels wrong." But Sophie shook her head. "We're not turning back now." They ventured deeper into the wing. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the farther they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of their breath and the occasional scrape of a shoe against the floor. Then, they came to a door at the end of the hallway, unmarked, unlike any of the other classrooms in the school. Sophie reached for the doorknob, her hand trembling despite herself. She could feel something pulling her in, a force she couldn't resist. The door opened with a loud crack, revealing an eerie, untouched classroom. It looked as though it had been frozen in time. Desks were lined up perfectly, though dust covered everything, and the once bright bulletin boards were now faded and cracked. On the far wall hung a massive chalkboard, its surface covered in faint, illegible writing. "What is this place?" Lily whispered, her voice shaking. Sophie stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The light from their flashlights flickered as they moved, casting strange, long shadows on the walls. There were portraits hung on the walls, paintings of children, their faces blank and expressionless. But what caught Sophie's eye was one painting in particular, a girl with long dark hair and sad hollow eyes. Suddenly, a voice, soft, like a whisper carried by the wind, reached her ears. "Leave now, before it's too late." Sophie froze, her heart pounding. The others heard it too, and panic spread across their faces. "What was that?" Ben asked, his voice high-pitched. Before Sophie could answer, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The room was plunged into complete darkness. "Sophie?" Lily's voice trembled. Sophie fumbled for her flashlight, but it was dead. There was no light, no sound, only an overwhelming sense of dread. A cold chill filled the room, and the floor beneath their feet seemed to shift. Then, the chalkboard began to move. The chalk, seemingly of its own accord, began to scrawl across the surface. Slow, deliberate. It spelled out a single name. Sophie. "Get us out of here," Jordan screamed, but no one could hear him over the growing whispers that filled the room. And then the lights flickered back on. The room was empty. The desks were still in place, the chalkboard still, but the portraits had all changed. Their eyes, those hollow eyes, were now fixed on Sophie, unblinking, their gazes full of accusation. Sophie felt a cold breath on the back of her neck, and when she turned, no one was there. The door swung open on its own, revealing the hallway beyond. Without thinking, the group bolted for the exit, but as they fled, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following them, watching them from the shadows. That night, Sophie lay in bed, the echo of the whisper still ringing in her ears. "Leave before it's too late."
The next day, the wing was locked once again. The school staff acted like nothing had happened, as if the wing had never been reopened. But Sophie couldn't forget the chilling presence she had felt in that room. It was as if something had been waiting for her, something that had been calling her to that forsaken place, to take her. And worse still, she couldn't shake the image of the girl in the portrait, her hollow eyes, staring into Sophie's very soul.